Disclaimer: please do not comment on my description of the stroke in this story. I am a stroke victim and will never fully recover as I allowed Trevor to do. I don't mean the erectile dysfunction, which is still going well at the moment, but unfortunately, I was never able to resume my career. Believe me, I know exactly what a stroke is, but I have opted for some artistic license to gloss over certain facts. A more vivid description does not make for good reading. Elvis died in the toilet. Everyone knows that. So did Judy Garland. Bless her. Not many people know that King George XI also died in the toilet. Well, in the toilet to be precise. I'm a historian, so it seems fitting that my life should end the same way. I may not die, of course. I seem to have had a seizure at my favorite bar in the harbor. My head hurts like hell. I guess there are worse ways to die. I just had a nice meal and a pint of my favorite beer. A lot of men would be happy to meet their maker after that. It's a shame I had to listen to Ben Mortimer talk about how well my favorite wife Mim is screwing, how spectacular her tits are, and her wonderfully sensitive nipples. She was a great kisser and blousy. After 32 years of marriage, I knew all that, of course. I would have been happy to die without knowing that someone else knew it too. What I didn't know, however, was how good the sex was taking her from behind. She had refused to do it since the early years of our marriage to me. She found it degrading and it hurt her knees. Apparently she could get over the pain if it was with a 19-year-old boy, a boy I used to teach. Of course, I may not die. I may survive. If I live, I'll teach Ben Mortimer a lesson he'll never forget. The little bastard. I don't usually go to the pub alone. I usually go with friends or Mim. She was visiting her parents for the evening, so to save myself from cooking, I decided on a pub meal. Steak and chips if anyone is interested. I'm a history teacher at a local high school in North Yorkshire. I've been there for over 30 years. I often teach the children of children I have previously taught. I haven't taught any grandchildren yet, but it probably won't be long now. I saw Ben Mortimer and his partner Kieran Yates leaning on the bar. I did a quick mental calculation and realized it was about 3 years since I had last taught them. They were over 18, so they could drink. After eating, I went over to chat with them to see what they were doing now. Turns out they both worked at the cookie factory, like Mim. They were in the workshop, but she was working as the general manager's secretary. Kieran let out a chuckle over his beer when I asked if they knew her. Ben said he'd seen her a couple of times when he had to report to the boss. We laughed for a while, and I made sure to buy them a drink during our chat. I said goodbye, and on my way out, decided to go to the bathroom. I was just getting settled when I heard the two boys come in. I don't know how you can be so calm about it, Ben. Mr. Moore is a nice guy. He just bought us both a pint. He was the best teacher I ever had. I hated history until we had him. How can you talk to him so normally when you're shagging his missus? Because I think he's a brilliant guy too. I'm not doing anything to hurt him. I really like him, I really do. I just like sucking on Mrs. Moore's big old tits more. I bet it is, laughed Kieran, although it's still wrong. Look, I'm doing him a favor, buddy. It's not my fault he can't get it up anymore, is it? I'm just his double. I'm giving him something he can't, and believe me, if it wasn't me, I'd be someone else. I'm not a threat to his marriage, am I? A 53-year-old woman isn't going to want to run away with me any more than I'd want to run away with her. Better me than an older guy who could be a real threat. I'm doing them both a favor. I still think he's a good guy. You want to see his artifact collection? He's got some really cool stuff in his man cave. You'd love it. Suddenly, Ben and Kyle were excited about my toys. Like the kids they still were, and excited about my toys, as was my wife. The thing with Miss Moore is sex. Pure and simple. Fantastic sex, but that's about it. After talking some more about the delights of my wife's body, they were gone. The tingling was getting worse and worse. Luckily, soon after someone came in, and I managed to get their attention. I thought I was telling them to call an ambulance. That's what it sounded like in my head. But not in reality. Luckily, they understood I wasn't just a drunk. They called an ambulance, and now I'm in the hospital. I lay back on my pillow and thought about Mim and me. We had been married for 32 years. We were married on the 21st of Mim. We had no children. That was a disappointment for me, but not for Mim. She didn't want children. I did, but I loved Mim more. End of story. She was enough for me. She always was. I thought I was enough for her. I was, until I wasn't. Not having children allowed us to travel and do whatever we wanted whenever we wanted. It gave us a sense of freedom that other couples our age with children to support did not have. It also gave us some extra income to play with. Although we weren't rich, we had kept the mortgage low and had paid it off years ago. We had a nice house. It wasn't huge, but we didn't need that much space for the two of us. In fact, we didn't even need the 2 guest rooms. Mim had one as a dressing room. She had beautiful clothes and liked to look nice. The other room was my cave. I have always had a passion for history, and there I kept my collection of military maps, memorabilia, and other artifacts and collections. It's not as bad as it looks, I promise. Everything was used at some point as part of lessons in school, the tools of my trade, so to speak. Mim was glad it was all contained and that all my junk didn't invade the rest of the house. I prided myself on being a good teacher. I was aware that my love of history was not shared by many to the same extent. Those who do not have that passion consider it a dry subject. My mission was to make it as exciting and relevant as possible for the children in my classes. I think I succeeded to some extent. I tried to make it fun and interesting, not to brag, but my popularity with the kids sometimes caused me a bit of professional jealousy, but I could handle it. If sometimes the kids loved me more than the subject, I didn't care. They were still learning. I was a normal-looking guy. I kept in shape, but Mim always looked beautiful to me. She was a normal-looking young woman, but she had aged very well. She always had large breasts. When we first met, she complimented me on always looking her in the eye. Most guys would talk to her chest. I didn't like to admit that I was very adept at looking at them every time she averted her gaze. Every time. Her breasts had fascinated me since we met 34 years ago. I revered them, and hearing them laughed at as big old tits in a pub toilet made me madder than I could say. I'd better take a deep breath. They're trying to keep my blood pressure stable. Mim and I had never been with anyone else. Well, I hadn't yet. Virgins when we met. We had always had a very good sex life. Unlike most couples, we kept up the same pace as we entered our 30s and then our 40s. We both had great sexual appetites, and without the distractions of children, we carried on as we had in the early years of our marriage. We never got bored, experimented, and spiced things up. A little role-playing and a lot of oral sex. So it was until Mim reached her 40s and menopause. It hit her hard. She really was very bad with it. At this point in our love life came to a complete halt. I wasn't even allowed to touch her. If I went to hold her, I was only looking for one thing. I was an insensitive bastard if she ever suggested making love. I had no idea how she felt. Well, no, I didn't. But as a loving husband, I did what I could to support her. So we went from having a very full sex life to a dead bedroom. No sex for 2 years. I suggested that I put a bed in my man cave so I could leave her alone. I honestly thought she would be happy. She could have the bedroom at the right temperature for her and she wouldn't worry about me pouncing at any time. Selfishly, I found it difficult, literally, to be in the same room as her. It was not only the visual stimulus of watching her dress and undress, but also her smell as I lay next to her. It was torture for me, compounded by the fact that I was freezing to death, as she kept the window wide open in the middle of winter because she was so hot all the time. When I suggested a temporary move, I was evil personified. I was turning it down. I didn't care. I was cruel. Well, let's just say I never moved out of our bedroom. No, I stayed ... frozen, frustrated, but glad to be being a supportive husband, in my own useless way. Suddenly, like a spring flower awakening at 52, things stabilized again for Mim. The menopause fairy had flown off in search of her next victim. She had left Miriam with some extra curves that really suited her. Unlike other women, the menopause fairy had also left Mim with a renewed sexual desire. Unfortunately, in the intervening years, I seem to have lost erection, if not desire. At first I thought it was lack of use, but no, it was erectile dysfunction. My doctor at the time was young and totally uncaring. He did not reassure me or help me to alleviate my mortification. Obviously, he thought this old man shouldn't worry about such things. He explained that it was a side effect of my stress medication, and that it was something I had to live with. He was very matter-of-fact. I was mortified. I felt embarrassed and belittled. It was hard enough to ask for help. I decided to think strategically. I could either abstain from lovemaking altogether or adopt a new way of making love to my wife. My pleasure was her pleasure. I still had hands and tongue in my head, didn't I? I had missed the closeness and intimacy with Mim for so long. I wasn't going to lose her again. We still made love, but in a different way. Don't they say that the largest sex organ is the brain? We made love 2 or 3 times a week. She continued to have many orgasms. However, it wasn't all about her. I regained some confidence and pride in the fact that I could still give her so much pleasure. As for penetrative sex, I was more than willing to use toys with her to satisfy that need. My only male pride was that the toys I used with her could only be used when she was with me. Silly, I know, but I needed to feel like they were an extension of me. She had other toys that she could use alone if she needed to. So, we were happy, I thought. It still kept her satisfied. As for me, I rediscovered the pleasure of being held, caressed, and kissed. I was being caressed, and Mim was still desired. I thought that was enough. I was wrong. At the hospital, they soon discovered that my stroke was ischemic, so I was soon prescribed a combination of drugs. Time was of the essence to avoid further damage and another stroke. Fortunately, I had regained my voice, although at first I would struggle to find the right words. A lovely nurse named Louise told me that Mim had been contacted, although it was still a couple of hours away. I managed to tell her that I didn't want to see her under any circumstances. I think Louise thought that was part of my confusion until she saw my blood pressure start to rise dramatically. I asked her to call my sister to come over. She was a local, and I knew she would be here long before Mim. My older sister helped me. She was also my older sister. Our Margaret was a big girl, 6, 3 inches in her socks, size 9, by the way. She had protected me as a child, and I knew she would be there for me. It seemed like only a few minutes from the time they called, and she showed up. Nurse Louise asked her if she had flown. Only on my bike, love. It's a Kawasaki. It flies when I need it to. With that, he wrapped me in the biggest hug and wiped a tear from his cheek. You big fool. You made me cry. Scare me like that. Don't you dare do that to me again. If you die on me, I'll kill you. We all laughed, even Nurse Louise. I told our Margaret what had happened, what I had heard. I didn't mind Louise hearing it either. I'll make sure he doesn't come in to see you. I have to make sure you are as calm as possible. You might also want to name your sister as next of kin on the hospital forms. Actually, the law doesn't define it. You can name whomever you want, Louise said. Well, I'm his closest blood relative, Margaret said. We only have each other now. Later, I was told that Mim was not at all amused to be told that he did not want to see her. Of course, she didn't know why. She made a real fuss. I don't blame her. I had no doubt that she was very worried about me. I also knew deep in my heart that she still loved me. Her concern for me was the beginning of her punishment. I had to talk to her. I knew I had to. I was not going to end 32 years of marriage without a discussion. However, I had no doubt that the marriage was over. I may have become a cuckold, but I was absolutely certain that I would not willingly or knowingly be one. Mim ended up seeing our Margaret. I was waiting for her in the hospital parking lot. I told Margaret to say whatever she needed to say, but nothing more. When Mim finished crying and checked that I was out of danger, she asked me why I didn't want to see her. Margaret just said, "You almost killed my brother with your shenanigans. You dirty bitch. Don't ever speak to me again." That done, he pulled down his visor and stepped into the night. When I was released from the hospital, I went to Margaret's house. She was still living in Mom's bungalow. I had bought my share after Mom's death. I was discharged with a list of instructions for my rehabilitation. Fortunately, I had recovered enough to be home, but I would need a series of therapies and support to continue to improve. I had only been at Margaret's house for a day when I asked her to invite Mim over. I needed to have the conversation I had been avoiding. I needed to hear what she had to say. I would love to say that there was a small part of me that could forgive her. I had loved her for so long. I loved her still. Well, the woman I thought she was. I also knew I was a stubborn, unforgiving Yorkshire. Coupled with male pride and ego, I didn't think I was capable of forgiving her, even if I wanted to. I needed to be able to look at myself in the mirror with some pride. I couldn't do it at that moment. I asked Margaret to disappear. She disappeared in the buff on her bike. She had left the door closed so Mim could get in. She looked worse than I did. Her eyes were puffy from crying, and she didn't look like she was sleeping. Trevor, I don't know whether to kiss you or slap you. Do you have any idea how worried I've been about you? If you thought you were saving me aggravation by not letting me see you, you were wrong. I can't eat. I can't sleep. All about how it affects you then, Mim? No, but I don't know why you would be so cruel. You know why, Mim. Think about it. I know you've been thinking about what Margaret said. What could you have done that would have upset me enough to send me to the hospital? And Margaret refused to talk to you. I'll give you a hint. Ben Mortimer. He had the delicacy to flinch when I said his name. He pulled himself together quickly. What's wrong with him? He's just a dumb kid at work. A dumb kid you're banging. How did you know? I've been so careful. Well, not careful enough to sleep with someone mature enough to be discreet, sadly. I heard him telling his mate Kieran what a good shagger you are. How he loves kissing on your big old tits. The look of horror on his face was a picture. I'm so sorry you had to hear that. It must have been horrible for you. Well, it was bad enough to send me to the hospital. Oh, honey, you shouldn't have let it bother you. It was nothing. He doesn't mean anything. He means nothing to me. To us. I don't feel anything for him, except lust. It was like another sex toy. You were still keeping me satisfied in your own way. Very satisfied, actually. It's just that something was missing. When I got the chance to have a flesh and blood cock, not just a hard piece of plastic, I couldn't resist. You couldn't or wouldn't. You left me 2 years without sex. 2 years. I could have gone out for some flesh and blood pussy, couldn't I? It wasn't my fault. It was menopause. At that moment, I lost my mind. It wasn't my fault either. It was because I was sick. In sickness and in health, remember that thing about giving up everything else? Does that ring a bell? It was okay that I was dissatisfied, but you weren't? Is that it? My God, your selfishness is unbelievable. The real difference is that you left me hanging with no affection, no hugs, no kisses, no nothing for 2 years. I still loved you. I was still there for you. You threw me away for 2 years and completely rejected me. You abandoned me, Mim, and now you've done it again. He looked away. He couldn't look at me. Imagine how I felt, listening to a couple of kids laughing at my wife, talking about her like she was a street whore. Talking about my more personal medical situation, laughing because she won't get up, doing things with him that you hadn't done with me in years. In my own house? You even let that little shit into my man cave. What have I ever done to you other than love you? What have I ever done to you to deserve this level of disrespect? It wasn't like that. You're misrepresenting it. I wasn't disrespecting him. I was just using you. It didn't affect my love for you in any way. It was separate. It was sex, that's all. Just sex. So, no tenderness? No real intimacy? Yes, that's exactly it. Just the physical act. I waited until I knew he was looking me in the eye. Mim, you're delusional. Isn't there real intimacy? I think letting another person into your body is probably the most intimate thing you can do. What about kissing? What about kissing? Are you worried about kissing? She snorted. You know historically prostitutes didn't kiss their clients because it was considered too intimate. Are you saying I'm a prostitute? I've only slept with 2 men in my entire life, you and him. Is that to reassure me? I'm not saying you're a prostitute, Mim. I have more respect for sex workers than I do for you right now. I could see his anger rising. Look, enough of this. Now you're being nasty. You're starting to piss me off, Trevor Moore. Go get your stuff. You're coming home with me now. We need to put all this nonsense behind us and get back to normal. What normal is this, Mim? Normal when you screwed teenagers in our bed, or normal when I had a faithful and devoted wife? I don't quite know how you're going to become disenchanted if you choose the latter. Now you're being clumsy. You're coming home with me. I want to. No, I need to take care of you. I can't bear to be away from you when you need me. I'm not coming home, Mim, and I certainly don't need you. I want you. I can't help it. I really wish I could, but I don't need you, and I certainly don't want you. You don't mean that. I do. You don't seem to be aware of what you have done to me, to our marriage, or to our love. The fact that you seem to dismiss your actions as nothing important tells me all I need to know. Our views and needs are too far apart. I'm surprised you haven't even apologized. I'll be honest with you. You deserve it after all these years. If you had thrown yourself at my mercy and begged for forgiveness, I doubt it would have changed anything. We'll never know though, will we? Basically, you don't feel you did anything wrong. You're sorry I found out, but you're not sorry you did. That's why our marriage is over, and that's why I'm divorcing you. You took something very precious to me, and you trashed it without any real consideration. I can no longer give you what you need. So I release you so you can have all the flesh and blood cocks you need. I also release myself since apparently being married to you is too dangerous to my health. It would have been a great sentence to end this conversation. But of course, real life isn't like that. Mim wasn't finished yet. You're being ridiculous. There will be no divorce. You're coming home with me, now. I love you and I need you. You can't throw 32 years of marriage away over this. I can't believe you're being so selfish. It was nothing. It was nothing. Well, that's the problem, Mim. It was something for me. The level of disrespect you've shown me in my own freaking house? Unbelievable. Am I being selfish? Now back off before you take another swing at me. Shortly after she left, I heard Margaret return on her motorcycle. She drove to the garage but did not enter the house. I went into the garage to tell her what had happened. She was tightening a screw on the rear license plate. Don't ask, she smiled. I've just been preparing a little gift for my favorite brother, Hermano Unico. Well, you'd still be my favorite. What did my former sister-in-law have to say? Gushing apologies. Not exactly. No, I don't think so. She's always been an entitled bitch, not that you could see that. Come on, boy, onward and upward. I'll make a cup of tea. A couple of days later, I read in the local paper that Ben Mortimer, 19, had fallen down the stairs in the old town. They were very dark, narrow stairs, wedged between a row of Georgian terraces. They led down to the promenade. They were very popular with drinkers who came up short on the way home. They reeked of urine. Poor Ben, a broken leg, collarbone, numerous ribs, and covered in urine. What a shame. There was a picture of him. He looked like a mess. Wasn't it lucky that it had happened when I was with Mim? Wasn't it lucky that the police had not yet found a possible witness to the accident? A tall guy wearing biker leathers. Thank you for my gift, I said, handing the paper to Margaret. I have no idea what you're talking about, he smirked. This is your gift from me. I opened the box he gave me and found a small selection of World War I medals. I thought you might like them. I found them in a store in the old town. Mim and I divorced, of course. She put up a bit of a fight. She never seemed to get over her surprise that I couldn't handle her infidelity. After the house was sold, we both bought apartments at the opposite end of town. Our paths crossed surprisingly little. I went back to work. I admit I struggled the first Christmas. I made a spectacle of myself at work. I was drowning my sorrows, I guess. One of the younger ones, Darren, took me home and I told him my story. His reaction and the support he gave me reassured me. Any man would have done the same in my place. I started to retire on my own. Margaret and I spent a lot of time together until she left for Greece. I kept seeing her on vacations. Life became a bit dull for a while, although I was still dealing with my history. At 65, I met a new neighbor, Brenda. We became good friends, companions, and in time, something more. We fell in love. The intimacy between us grew until we were sharing a bed and making love in our own way. One night, quite early in this new phase of our relationship, something came up. Literally. We certainly didn't let it go to waste. I rushed to the doctor as soon as possible to see if it was a one-time thing. He was an older doctor who was surprised to learn that I had received so little support in the past. He was also saddened to learn that my erectile dysfunction had played a major role in the end of my first marriage. With his help and a slight change in medication, getting and maintaining an erection was no longer a problem. Everything was solved when we went on our honeymoon. That was 10 years ago. We are now 75 and still very much in love. Mim never remarried, as far as I know. She moved away after I remarried. She was very bitter the last time I saw her. There was a hardness and meanness that wasn't there before. It was right after Brenda and I got engaged. We were sitting in our favorite coffee shop having coffee when Mim showed up. I introduced them, and Mim said something so spiteful it took my breath away. Well, I hope you can live without full sex since he hasn't been able to get it hard for years. I think maybe I just needed the right woman, my dear. You certainly presented me with something very hard this morning before breakfast, Brenda said with a smirk. Mim looked at me. Really? Yes, really, Mim. Turns out I just needed to be with someone loving and selfless who really cared about me. With that, Mim stormed off. Jealousy is a terrible thing, I know that. I felt it once very severely. Hopefully, I found what I wanted. I made him, in time, a faithful and loving wife. Oddly enough, Ben Mortimer is now our mailman. He is almost 40 years old. He looked horrified when he saw me open the door to our apartment that first time. He apologized for what happened, saying he was just a stupid, horny guy who didn't know any better. Now that he was happily married, he was even more ashamed of what happened, especially because you were always my favorite teacher. I am so ashamed of what I did. I will always regret it. I told my wife when we were dating. She was outraged when I told her. I had a hard time convincing her to marry me because she said she couldn't be with someone who didn't respect the marriage vows. In the end, I convinced her that I had learned from my mistakes. I hope that in time, I can convince her of the same thing. No need, Ben. It was 20 years ago. Ancient history. I appreciate your apology. It's more than I ever got from Mim. Anyway, we've all moved on. How about going back to being an old teacher and alumnus? Then I did something I never thought I would be able to do. I shook his hand. I also managed to slip into the conversation that my medical problems had long since been solved. I think I embarrassed him. People don't like retirees having sex. Now, every time I see him, we laugh and joke. I always make sure to tell her to be careful on the stairs on her way out.